My grandmother passed away on a Tuesday in November, and by Friday, my mother-in-law already knew exactly how much she left me. I don't know how she found out. I hadn't told anyone except my husband, Daniel, and I had asked him specifically to keep it quiet until I figured out what I wanted to do with the money. It wasn't a fortune, $42,000, saved over 60 years by a woman who reused aluminum foil and bought bread on the day before expiration discount. It was everything my grandmother had, and it was mine. But somehow, before I had even finished crying, before I had even picked out what to wear to the funeral, my mother-in-law Carol knew. And once Carol knew something, it was never just information. It was leverage. I should give you some background. Daniel and I got married 3 years ago. I'm a registered nurse, 31 years old, and I work the overnight shift at a regional hospital 40 minutes from the house we rent in a quiet suburb of Columbus, Ohio. I am not a dramatic person. I don't like conflict. I grew up in a house where my mother handled everything by going quiet and waiting for problems to resolve themselves, and I inherited more of that than I'd like to admit. I have spent most of my adult life being described as easygoing by people who sometimes meant it as a compliment and sometimes meant it as an observation that I could be pushed. Carol lives 20 minutes away. She is 63, recently retired from a job in insurance, and she has a very specific way of being involved in her son's life that looks like love from the outside and feels like something else entirely from the inside. She calls Daniel every morning. Not texts, calls. She drops by without notice. She has opinions about how we load the dishwasher, where we buy our groceries, and what kind of health insurance I should have chosen when I switched hospital systems 2 years ago. She once reorganized our kitchen cabinets while we were at a wedding, and then acted confused when I wasn't grateful. Daniel is a good man. He is kind and he works hard and he genuinely loves me. But he grew up in Carol's house, which means he grew up being managed by her, which means that a part of him still flinches when she raises her voice and still reaches for compromise when compromise is not what the situation calls for. He doesn't always see what I see, or maybe he sees it and hopes that if he doesn't name it, it will stay small. It didn't stay small. My grandmother's name was Ruth. She raised me for 2 years when I was in middle school while my parents were sorting through a difficult period in their marriage, and in that time she taught me how to cook from scratch, how to balance a checkbook, and how to tell the difference between people who were rooting for you and people who just wanted to be nearby when things went well. She was one of the clearest thinkers I have ever known, and I miss her every single day. When her attorney called me 3 weeks after the funeral to explain that she had left me the contents of her savings account, I sat in my car in the hospital parking garage for a long time before I drove home. I felt grateful and sad at the same time, the way you do when someone takes care of you from beyond a place you can reach. I told Daniel that night. I told him it was $42,000 and that I wanted to think carefully before doing anything with it. Maybe put most of it toward our emergency fund, keep some aside for the down payment we'd been saving for. He hugged me and said that sounded wise. I asked him not to mention it to Carol yet. He said, of course. She called me the next morning. I was just getting home from my overnight shift when my phone rang. I was still in my scrubs, standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water, and when I saw her name on the screen, I almost didn't answer. But I did, because at that point I still thought it might be coincidence. Maybe she was calling about something else. Maybe this was just a Tuesday morning phone call. I heard about your grandmother, she said. I'm so sorry for your loss. I thanked her. I waited. Daniel mentioned she left you a little something. There it was. A little something. $42,000 described as a little something. And already I could hear the shape of what was coming. The way you can hear a storm before it arrives. He did mention that, I said carefully. Well, I just want to say, and I hope you take this in the spirit it's intended. I think it's so important to be smart with money like that, especially at your stage of life. You two are still so young, and there are so many ways that money can just disappear if you're not careful. I actually have a financial advisor I've used for years. I could introduce you. He specializes in exactly this kind of situation. I told her I appreciated the thought, and that Daniel and I were still figuring out our plan. She said that was probably wise. Then she said that she also knew of a wonderful investment opportunity. A colleague of her friend's brother was building a small commercial property in the area and was looking for private investors, very low risk, very solid returns. She could connect me if I was interested. I said I wasn't interested. She said she understood, of course, no pressure at all, just wanted me to know the option was there. I got off the phone and stood very still in my kitchen for about 2 minutes. Then I called my own mother. What I want to be clear about is that I did not overreact in the beginning. I didn't storm over to Carol's house or send a long message or cry to Daniel about what she'd said. I took a breath. I made a note in my phone of the date and the content of the conversation, and I went to sleep. Because I work overnight shifts, and I needed sleep. And also, because I genuinely wanted to give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe it was clumsy kindness. Maybe it was just how she showed she cared. I had been married to her son for 3 years, and I knew how to wait and see. I moved the inheritance into a new savings account that week, one that was only in my name, at a bank I had opened before Daniel and I got married, one that Carol didn't know about. I'm not sure why I did it then. Instinct, maybe. Or some quiet thing my grandmother had passed down to me about keeping your money close to your chest until you knew who was at the table. It turned out to be one of the better decisions I've made in my life. The calls from Carol got more frequent over the next few weeks. She would call Daniel in the morning and then call me separately in the afternoon. She started texting me links articles about inheritance tax, about the probate process in Ohio, about the benefits of adding a family member to a savings account as a co-signer. She sent me a link to a podcast about women and money management. She began stopping by the house more often, always with food, always staying longer than the food required. She would sit at our kitchen table and steer the conversation back to finances with the subtlety of someone who didn't feel the need to be subtle anymore. One evening she suggested, over a casserole she'd brought uninvited, that it might make sense to put the inheritance into a joint account with Daniel. I looked up from my plate. "It's just that you're a family now," she said. "Money like that should work for both of you. And honestly, having Daniel on the account would give you both more oversight. More protection." "I have protection," I said. "It's my account." She looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at his casserole. "Of course," she said. "I'm just saying, it would make things simpler." I thought about what my grandmother would have said to that. I thought she would have said that when someone tells you simplicity is the goal, you should ask yourself what they're trying to make simple for themselves, not for you. I said goodnight to Carol that evening and I let Daniel walk her out. While he was doing that, I sat at the kitchen table, and I opened my phone and I added to my notes the date, what she'd said, the look she'd given Daniel when I pushed back. The next week, Daniel told me his mother had mentioned knowing someone at a small investment firm who could help us maximize the inheritance if we acted quickly, because there was a limited window and the returns were exceptional. I asked him who this person was. He didn't know. I asked him if he had looked into it at all before bringing it to me. He looked uncomfortable. I asked him directly, "Daniel, are you passing along what your mother tells you without thinking about whether it's a good idea, or are you actually interested in this investment?" He said he was just trying to keep the peace. I told him that keeping the peace was not the same thing as having my back. I said it quietly and without drama, but I said it clearly. He nodded slowly and he didn't argue, which told me he already knew. I want to be honest about the next part because I think it's the part that matters most. I wasn't angry at Carol the way you might expect. What I felt was more like alertness. The way you feel at the hospital when something small shifts in a patient's chart and you're not sure yet if it means anything, but you don't look away either. I was watching. I was documenting. And I was taking steps that she didn't know about. I went to my bank that week and I sat down with an advisor, and I made sure that my savings account was in my name only, with no beneficiary that could be altered without my physical presence, and 2 forms of identification. I called all 3 credit bureaus and placed a fraud alert on my accounts, which meant any new credit opened in my name would require additional verification. I changed the mailing address for any financial statements to my work email and a P.O. box I opened at the post office 3 blocks from the hospital. If Carol was intercepting mail at our house, and I had no proof she was, but I was no longer operating on the assumption of good faith, she would get nothing. I told Daniel what I had done. Not to ask permission, to inform him. He listened and didn't say much. And later that night he told me he thought I was being a little paranoid. I told him I hoped he was right. I kept the P.O. box. About 6 weeks after my grandmother's death, I came home from a day shift I had switched to days for a few weeks to cover a colleague's leave and found Carol sitting in our living room. Daniel wasn't home yet. She had her own key, which had always been a point of tension I had agreed to let go. She had a folder on the coffee table in front of her. "I hope you don't mind," she said. "I let myself in. I wanted to catch you before Daniel got home because I actually wanted to talk to you privately." I sat down across from her. I did not offer her anything to drink. She pushed the folder across the coffee table toward me. "I've been doing some research," she said. "This is information about a living trust. If you put the inheritance into a family trust naming you, Daniel, and ideally a trustee who has financial expertise, it protects the asset long term. It means if anything were to happen to either of you, the money doesn't get tied up in probate. It grows with oversight. It's what people with real financial sense do." I looked at the folder. I didn't open it. "And who would the trustee be?" I asked. She smiled. "I was actually thinking I could take that on. I have the background. I know the family's needs. It would just be a formality, really." There it was. I want you to understand what she was proposing. She was suggesting that I take the money my grandmother had saved over 60 years and hand effective oversight of it to my mother-in-law, that she become the trustee, that she sit between me and my own inheritance with legal authority. I picked up the folder. I held it for a moment. Then I put it back on the coffee table. "No," I said. She blinked. "I'm just trying to help. I know you believe that," I said. "But the answer is no." Her expression shifted into something cooler. "You know, Ruth would have wanted this money used wisely. She would have wanted you to have guidance. She used my grandmother's name." I felt something tighten in my chest that I hadn't felt before, not sadness exactly, but something that recognized a line being crossed. Carol had never met my grandmother. She had no claim on what Ruth would have wanted. None at all. I stood up. "I'd like you to take that folder with you when you leave," I said. She left without it. I threw it away without opening it. That night I told Daniel everything. I described the folder, the trustee proposal, the use of my grandmother's name. I watched his face while I talked. He looked tired in a way that was different from his regular tired, a deep, behind-the-eyes kind of tired that I recognized as the exhaustion of someone who has known something was wrong for a while and kept hoping it would fix itself. He said, "She means well." I said, "Daniel, she came to our house while you weren't home, and she proposed that she become the legal trustee of my inheritance. Does that sound like someone who means well? Or does that sound like someone with a plan?" He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I'll talk to her." I told him that would be a good start. I also told him that I had already taken precautions with the accounts and that no one was getting access to anything, regardless of what anyone proposed. He nodded. He looked relieved, actually, in a small way, like he had been waiting for me to be the one to close the door so he wouldn't have to. The thing about having good documentation is that when the next step comes, you're ready. 3 weeks later, I got a notification from my bank's fraud alert system. Someone had contacted the bank's customer service line and made an inquiry about the account specifically. They had asked about the process for adding a joint account holder. The bank flagged it because of the fraud alert I had placed. They did not give out any information, and they called me within the hour. I asked them to note the inquiry, and I called my contact at the bank directly. I asked them to add an additional verbal password to my account so that nothing, not even an information request, could happen without that password. They did. Then I called an attorney. Not a general attorney. A family law and financial protection attorney who had been recommended to me by a colleague at the hospital who had gone through something similar with a family member after an inheritance. I made an appointment. I brought my documentation, every note I had made, every date, every conversation, the folder Carol had left on my coffee table, the bank notification. The attorney listened to everything. She was calm and precise, and she used the phrase financial coercion without hesitating, which made something in my chest loosen slightly because it meant I hadn't imagined what I'd been dealing with. She drafted 2 things for me. The first was a formal letter to be delivered to Carol, outlining clearly and in legal language that my accounts and assets were my private property, that any further attempts to access, influence, or obtain information about those accounts would constitute harassment and potentially financial fraud, and that all future contact regarding my finances should be directed to my attorney. The second was a brief but direct conversation guide for Daniel, not a legal document, but a clear statement of what I needed from him going forward and what I would not continue to accept. I brought both home. I sat Daniel down first. I want to say this part carefully because I think it's important. I didn't go after Daniel. I wasn't cruel, and I wasn't dramatic. But I was clear in a way that I had not been before. I told him that I loved him, and that I believed he loved me. I told him that love without protection isn't enough, that when someone is consistently working against his wife, the response can't just be to keep the peace. I told him I needed him to understand that his mother's behavior had crossed from overbearing into something that required a real response, and that if he couldn't stand next to me on that, I needed to know. He cried. Not dramatically, just quietly. In the way that men sometimes cry when they finally let themselves see something they've been looking away from. He said he was sorry. He said he hadn't realized how far it had gone. I told him I believed him, and that sorry was a starting point, not a finish line, and that what I needed now was action. He agreed to be present when I delivered the letter to Carol. He agreed to stand next to me. He agreed not to soften it. We went together on a Saturday morning. Carol opened the door in her bathrobe, clearly not expecting us. When she saw the envelope in my hand, something in her face went careful. We sat in her living room. I handed her the envelope. I told her my attorney had prepared it, and that she should read it fully, and that if she had questions, she should direct them to the attorney's contact information included at the bottom. She read it. The room was very quiet. Daniel sat beside me, and he did not look at his shoes. When she finished, she looked at me. Then she looked at Daniel. "You're letting her do this?" she said to him. Daniel said, "Mom, I asked her to do this." It was the first time he had said anything like that. Clearly, out loud, without qualification. I felt the air shift. Carol's face went through several things at once. She folded the letter. She set it on the cushion beside her. She said she needed time to think, and we said that was fine, and we left. She called Daniel twice that evening. He let it go to voicemail both times. She texted him the next morning. He responded briefly. He had said what he needed to say, and he meant it. She did not contact me about my finances again. What I did not expect was the grief. Not grief about Carol. I had done my grieving about that relationship in small pieces over 3 years of casseroles and cabinet reorganizations. But grief about the version of the in-law relationship I had still been quietly hoping for. The one where we figured it out. The one where she eventually saw me as someone worth trusting. I let myself feel that for a while, because I think it deserves to be felt. And then, I let it go. About 3 months after the letter, Mother's Day came around. Daniel asked me what I wanted to do about his mother, whether we should send a card, visit, acknowledge the day in some way. I thought about it for a few days. I decided to send a gift. Not for Carol's sake, I want to be honest about that. But because I had spent 3 months being reactive, documenting, protecting, defending, and I didn't want to end the chapter on that note. I wanted to end it on my terms, not in anger or avoidance, but in something quiet and decided. I bought her a small, succulent plant in a white ceramic pot. Succulents survive with very little. They don't require much from the environment around them. They are self-contained and resilient, and they ask for nothing but a little space and light. I included a card. I wrote, "Wishing you a peaceful day. Not warm, not cold, peaceful." Exactly what I intended. Daniel delivered it. He said she received it without saying much, that she looked at the card for a long time. I don't know what she made of it. I don't need to. What I know is this. My grandmother saved $42,000 by knowing the value of what she had and never letting anyone talk her out of it. She kept her own counsel. She trusted her own instincts. She took care of herself so she could take care of the people she chose. I put $30,000 of the inheritance into a high-yield savings account toward the house we're still working toward. I put $10,000 in an investment account in my name only. I kept $2,000 liquid, because Ruth always said a woman should have money she can get to fast if she needs to, with no explanation required. The accounts are mine. The password is mine. The P.O. box still gets my statements every month, and I am the only one who opens them. I don't tell this story to make Carol into a villain, or not only that, I tell it because I spent too long being easygoing about things that deserve to be taken seriously. Because I was raised to wait and see and not make problems. And sometimes waiting and seeing is wisdom, but sometimes it's just a long way of letting someone take what belongs to you. My grandmother knew the difference. By the end of this, I think I do too. She left me more than the money. She left me the lesson that came with it. And that is worth more than $42,000. It's worth more than I know how to say.